Hello and welcome to part 4 of creating a simple 3D move it dodge game using the Godot game engine. My name is Colin, and in this video series we're creating this simple video game using the Godot game engine. This is part 4. If you have not seen the first 3 tutorials in this mini-series, I'll put a link to those in this playlist on the screen right now. But in this video we're going to be going over 4 simple things to make your game look better and to adjust the way that the user sees your game. First, we'll look at viewport resolution. In other words, the window size of the game once you export it so the user can play it. Second, we're going to make the camera follow our player. Now there are many ways you can do this, but there is actually a special kind of a camera node in Godot that will follow a character really nicely, so we're going to set that up to work really well. Third, we're going to look at lighting. We're going to add lights to our scene and adjust the shadows. And lastly, we're going to look at the environment of our scene and change our sky color. And we're going to turn off that ugly blue cast that the sky is currently casting onto our entire game, creating this blue hazy look. We'll get rid of that in this video. But of course, if you like this video or if you learned something, please go ahead and click on that like button below this video. It really helps me out. And if you want to see more videos like this one in Godot or Blender or technology, click on that subscribe button as well, and click on the bell icon if you want to get notified whenever I upload a new tutorial. So let's go ahead and dive into Godot. This is my project as I currently have it. The first thing we'll do is we'll look at the viewport resolution, not this viewport of the 3D workspace, but when we go ahead and play or export our game or test it out, even by pressing the play scene button, this window size. For some reason, Godot has a default resolution, that means number of pixels across left and right and up and down, of 1024 by 600. Why it's that, I don't really know. It's not a very common standard of resolution. Maybe it has to do with old Android tablets. I'm not sure. But I'll close this preview, and if I go up to Project and Project Settings, you're going to see the Project Settings window and lots of tabs along the top. But in the first tab, if we scroll down on the left side to the section called Display and Window, I was actually already there. We're going to see the size options for our screen. So again, it's 1024 by 600 is the default, and by default the user can actually resize the window by dragging the bottom corner, just kind of like that. You might want to turn that off. You might also want to have a borderless window, but that might make the game hard to close unless you actually program a quit option in your game, which we're not going to cover in this series. So I would leave borderless off. I think that's a less, so it's a negative. So yeah, hopefully that's the right one. And I'm going to change the width and height of my game window to 1280 by 720. That's basically 720p. That's a standard size. It's the standard aspect ratio of most computer screens nowadays, or at least televisions anyways. It's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. So if I go ahead and now press close, and of course you can explore lots of these options for yourself, and I go and play my scene, we can now see, and can I grab the corner? No, I can't, but it's a bit bigger and it's a bit more widescreen. So now that we have this viewport size, we know what our player is going to see and we know their user experience. So that's window size. Next up is camera. Right now we have a camera in our scene, and if we look in our node stack here, or tree, in our scene dock, we're going to see our camera node is right here, and all you need to do to make your camera stick to your character is just drag it onto the character. So I'll drag the camera onto Steve, and we're done. Well, are we? Well, this will work, but if I press the play scene button, and as you can see now, if I roll around, the camera is following, but it's being very rigid. In other words, if I move left and right even slightly, the camera follows with the exact same amount of movement. It's a child of our character, and that means that because children follow along with their parents, at least in this hierarchical structure, it will move exactly as my character moves. Now, you might not want that, and I would not suggest that. That's not how most video games handle following cameras. Cameras tend to move a little bit more in a relaxed fashion. They have a bit of a delay and catch-up mechanism. Not catch up the food, but they catch up to the player and kind of stick with it, but they try to be more smooth than the actual action of the character. So let's go ahead and see how we do that. I'm going to actually go ahead and select this camera and delete it from my scene. Believe it or not, yeah, we're going to get rid of the camera. So I'll right click on it over here and say delete nodes and press OK. Instead of having a normal camera object, I'm going to select my level and I'll press the plus. There is another kind of a camera object under spatial and under camera. Camera is actually a category. There's another kind of camera object called interpolated camera. And if you know what the word interpolated means in terms of programming, interpolation has to do with different values on a scale. Specifically, or more informally, we can think of it as going from one value to another value. In other words, this interpolated camera can be told to kind of stick to or try to follow an object, and it will gradually get there over time. So I'm going to select that, press create. It gets it put in the middle of my scene, but I'll drag it up and drag it forward on the z-axis, so it's looking at the scene, kind of like the old camera. But now it needs an object to look at, and actually with it selected in my scene dock, if I look over here in the inspector at its properties, it has a target option, and it's the very first option because it's the most important. It needs to know what object we're following. So I'm going to assign it. I'm going to assign it to my Steve character. Now this is not actually going to work, and I'll tell you why. If I press the play scene button, we're going to see the game starts off. My camera is looking at my character. Oops, you know what? I forgot one option. We've got to enable it here. So I don't know why that's not enabled by default, but it does need to be enabled. And we press the play scene button. You can see that the camera is zooming in and it's going right into the middle of the ball. So if I move the ball though, it'll actually move up and the camera will catch up to it. This is obviously not what we want. We actually want to make a secret invisible object behind the ball, or above and behind the ball, that the camera will go to, and that secret hidden object is going to be rotated a little bit, pointing downwards at the ball, and that secret hidden object will be a child of the ball, and it will be the camera's new target. So if I select Steve, I'm going to add that secret invisible object. We're going to use a basic spatial node, the same as the root of our scene. So with Steve selected, I'll press the plus. I'm going to add a spatial. It's the first one right there. I'll press create. And a spatial, when you add it into your scene, it basically acts like a coordinate in 3D space. So if I move it up, all we really see is this little box that's not really even there. So I'm going to move it up and forward on the z-axis, and maybe we'll play around with where it goes. And I want it to not point straight forward. I want it to point down a little bit at the ball, because that's how we're going to want to see it. And now I'm going to make the camera follow that object instead. And as you can see, when I selected the camera, we can't even see where that object is. This object, by the way, is called spatial right now. I might want to go ahead and double click and call it something like camera target. Okay, so now I'll select my camera. I'll go to the target option, and I'm going to select the camera target and press OK. So now if I go ahead and press play scene or test scene, we can see the camera zooms in, and now it's looking at the ball quite nicely, and I can move the ball around, and as you can see, the camera will kind of catch up to it. If I move it back, maybe it's getting too close to the camera, but the camera will not really let it get too out of frame, but then it'll back up a little bit more even after the ball stops rolling. So this is quite nice. If you want to adjust how fast the camera moves to keep up with your object, that's an option, and it's called speed. And generally I like a speed of about 5. So I'll change that right there with the interpolated camera selected, and I'll press the play scene button, and we're pretty good. One thing you might think about doing is you might think about making your camera be quite far away when you start your game, and rotated to look at your scene as a whole before it zooms in, and that way when your player starts your game or starts the level, it will zoom in, and maybe that 5 is a little bit high. Maybe I'd like 3, and let's try that again. so that way the user gets to see the whole scene before it moves in. And you can adjust the speed as you see fit, but that works quite well. Next up is lighting. Right now we have this ugly blue cast on our game from the sky, and one thing that can help that, just one thing that can help that, is adding a light. So I'm going to go to my level, select this top root node, and I'll press plus. Yes, there are 3D light objects or nodes that you can add under spatial. Lights can be found under the visual instance category. And there they are, lights. And there are several kinds of lights: directional lights, omni lights, spotlights. Directional lights are lights that cast everywhere in one direction, just like the sun. That's why its icon is the little sun. So we're going to use that one. If you want to have a small light in a scene that only casts for a certain amount of distance, like a light bulb that would have a fall off, you might use an omni light. But if I use a directional light and press create, it's been added into my scene, and for some reason it's pointing sideways, so I'm going to go ahead and drag it up and rotate it so it's pointing down. And as you can see, the light in my scene becomes a little bit less blue. There is still blue light casting on my scene, but now I have this white light that's brighter than the sky pointing down at my scene. Now this directional light does not have any shadows, so if I select it over here in my scene dock and I go over to the inspector, I have to enable shadow. So under the shadow category, I need to enable shadows, and there we go, we get shadows. If we want to change the color of the shadows, or actually the property of the light, in other words the color of the light, or the energy or the brightness of it, we can do that. So if I want to make the light a little bit, let's say, I don't know, a little bit pinky, I would just change that a little bit with the color picker. So here we go, now our light's just a little bit pinky, or perhaps a little bit orange. So there you go, that'll help counteract the color of the sun, but we're gonna do that when we change our environment anyways. You'll notice that the quality of the shadows with a light won't necessarily be the greatest. It will improve, hopefully, assuming that you're using a GLES 3 project. You will see it improve a little bit, if not substantially, when you go ahead and test your scene out. So now you can see, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at where my camera is. It's over here, and I'm going to rotate my lamp so it's at a diagonal so we can see it better through the viewport. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and rotate it so it's pointing more actually towards the camera, so we get a shadow that we're looking at from behind. It's a little bit better. There are shadow settings under directional shadow if you have your light selected, and I'm not going to get into these, but really what determines the quality of a shadow is the kind of light that you have. We have a directional light, but it also determines, or the quality of the shadow is determined by what's called a split, and there are 3 or 4 sections of a shadow depending on how far away from the lamp the shadow is. So the closer you are to the light and the camera, I believe, in your scene, the higher quality of shadows, and where it determines where to make lower quality shadows farther away from the lamp or the camera, I'm really not sure, are these split numbers, and you can play around with these. You can also attempt to blend the splits, which means that you are trying to not make such harsh distinctions between different quality areas of shadows, I believe, if I understand it correctly. You can play around with these numbers, but I would actually write down what these numbers are before you change them in case you mess up and need to change them back. I will adjust the energy of this lamp a little bit. So maybe it's at 1 right now. Let's try maybe 1.5 and turn it up. And as you can see, we get a brighter light, or we could turn it down. That's really up to you. The last thing I might want to change to do with my shadows or my light is the max distance that shadows will be drawn away from the camera. The default is 200, but if you want to save some memory and some processing power and increase the speed of the runtime of your game, you might turn this down. What this max distance value means is how far away from your game's camera shadows will be drawn. So if I change this number to, let's say, oh, I don't know, 40 instead of 200, the default, and I go ahead and play my scene, we should see shadows in the game just fine, but if I were to move and roll my ball back, if you look at this shadow being cast by the box, it will eventually fade out and disappear if I get too far away from it, and that's a detail that I might want to sacrifice to help my game run a little bit better, especially on older hardware. Yes, by the way, my ball will not fall off the edge of my platform right now because we have not programmed gravity on the ball. Gravity is inherent with rigid body objects like this box. It fell down, it tumbled, but our kinematic body character does not have gravity unless you program it in. And as we come back closer to that box, of course, we see its shadow again. Okay, so that is adding a directional light with shadows. Last but not least, let's talk about changing the sky color and the sky light and the environment as a whole. When you start a new Godot project, you're actually given an environment resource to define this color. If I move away from or pan away from my ground, this color of sky, including the sun, including the horizon color and the color that it fades to, and the color of the ground and the color that it fades up to towards the horizon. This resource is called an environment, and you can actually see it right here, default_env for environment.tres. That's an environment resource file in Godot, and it comes with every new Godot 3.1 new project. This environment is actually the one that we're seeing right now in our viewport. And environments are what you can specify per camera. So if I go ahead and select my interpolated camera over here, you're going to see that there is a spot for an environment over here in the inspector, and it's empty. What I'm going to do, and what you actually could do, is you could drag this environment over into the environment slot, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make a new environment, and we're going to customize the colors and the light color of the sky, and then we're going to make it actually appear not only in the camera, which could be different than your editor viewport, but we're going to make it apply to the viewport as well. So to make a new environment, you select your camera, go over to the inspector, go to environment, and we'll click on this little arrow and say new environment. When you do that, you get a bunch of new options in this little pull-out section. And if I expand background, well, I could have a clear color if I wanted, or I could make a new sky. If I just leave it at clear color, because this environment is now the one that's associated with the camera in my game, if I press play scene, I will no longer see the sky in my scene. I will see this clear color, which will show me the background or default color of my game's viewport, and there's no light coming off of that sky, so we get this black. So I don't want that. I'm going to make a new sky. You can play around with other options, but sky is good for a 3D environment. And when you do that, you get a bunch of options, including what kind of a sky you want. And again, this is a resource that you can, it'll expand out, so you can change the options, but we're not going to play around with a lot of these. We are going to make a new sky for this mode sky that we just specified. So right below that, I'm going to go to where it says empty and click the little arrow. I'm going to say new procedural sky. When you do that, and it makes a new procedural sky, I can click on it. It'll expand out this little resource within a resource, really. And we have options to change our sky and ground color, including our sun. So let's go ahead and explore these a little bit. When I expand sky out under procedural sky, you can see we can specify the top and horizon colors of our sky. So I could make my sky, oh, I don't know, a pink color. And I might make my horizon an orangey yellow color. Now I'm not seeing this in my editor, but if I go ahead and press the play scene button, you're going to see that, yeah, you can see it in the game, and our whole scene's being lit up with that color. And if my camera wasn't pointing so angled down, you would see that the sky is actually that color. Maybe I can go ahead and get my camera target, and my camera target is over here, and I might just lower it a little bit and rotate it so it's not quite such at an angle. And let's go ahead and play the scene again. And so now you can see my wonderful sky color. Don't worry about the color being cast, we can change that as well. So I'm going to select my camera again, and now we can see these options again. I'm going to change the ground color as well, so we're going to make it maybe a dark purpley blue color, kind of like that, and maybe up towards the horizon we're going to make it look a little bit more orangey to match the color of the bottom of the sky at the horizon. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And that looks really psychedelic. Now, if you want to change the light coming off of the sky, you can do that as well. That is not an option of the procedural sky, so I can go ahead and collapse that section where our colors for the sky and the ground were. It's actually a setting called ambient light in the entire environment option. So if I collapse background again, where that procedural sky was, that resource within a resource, the next section down is called ambient light. And there's a slider for sky contribution. This is the color, how much the color of the sky contributes to the color of my scene. So if I slide this down, well, I'm not going to get that influence of the color on my scene from my sky. So instead what I can do is, well, if it's black, we're not going to get much ambient light at all. So if I play my scene, it's going to probably look quite dark. Instead, what I'm going to do, but you know what? That green of the ground looks really, really green and nice. It's the actual color. What I can do instead is change the ambient color from black up to, let's say, white, or maybe a lighter shade of gray. So now that shade of gray will be the light coming from all sides of our environment. So if I go ahead and press the play scene button, our game is brighter again. It's white or light gray light coming from all sides, but we have a nice color of sky, and if I move around, it looks pretty good. What I might do in this case is just make this a little bit pink, kind of like that, just to give it that nice hue that will make it look like the game fits in with the sky a little bit better. But you know what? I want to see that sky that I just made in my editor. Why am I seeing this blue sky? I want to actually see what my game looks like. Well, what I'm going to do here is take this environment that I have made through my camera's property settings in the inspector dock, and I'm going to save this environment as a resource. So I'm going to click next to the word environment, and I'm going to save this environment as a .tres file. We have this default _env.tres, that's the blue one that we have in our viewport. I'm going to save this one as new _env and click save, and it is now right there. I just made it in my project folder. I probably should have organized it, but oh well. And up in my project settings, under project settings, I can go to under, where is it? It must be somewhere under this first general tab, and then if I scroll down, I will find one under rendering and environment, and here is the default environment for a 3D scene, default.env.trs, the blue sky, the one that's down right here. And if I click on the folder, I can select new env and press open and press close, and now you can see I can see that environment in my editor. So as you can see, you can have multiple environments depending on what camera you're looking through in your game, which is a pretty cool feature, and you can actually see that same environment if you save it out to a resource in your viewport. So let's go ahead and test this out. I should now see the exact same thing in my viewport that I see in the game, and that looks pretty good. That will be it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, if you learned something, go ahead and click on that like button below this video. It really helps me out. If you want to see more videos like this one in Godot or Blender or technology, click on that subscribe button as well, and click the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload a new tutorial. Check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borncg. On that page, I post previews and sneak peeks of what I'm working on next. But that'll be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.